You may have recently heard about Nintendo's ridiculous employee retention rate of around 98%. Once you're in Nintendo, you never really leave, and that applies to developers on the workforce just as much as the creators of hit series. Shigeru Miyamoto, creator of Mario, Donkey Kong, Zelda and Pikmin, is now a higher up at Nintendo. Yoshio Sakamoto, creator of Metroid, still works at the company. Masahiro Sakurai, creator of Kirby, may only now be working on the series again for the first time in forever, but he has still never left Nintendo's side. And while the creator of Pokemon, Satoshi Tajiri, has been a background figure for a long time now, he still works on the series as executive producer. And as for the creator of Fire Emblem, Shozo Kaga, well, he too still produces games, but they only release on Steam, have a development team consisting of his own followers, and he won't exactly be invited to any Nintendo reunions anytime soon either. Rarely has Nintendo ever burned a bridge with a past developer so fiercely as with Shozo Kaga, despite the fact he will forever remain the creator of a series that is closing in on its 40th anniversary. This is the story of how Shozo Kaga built his legacy and then saw it all crumble apart. Unfortunately, not too much is known about Shozo Kaga's early life. We know he was born in Japan in 1955, but what his childhood was like or even his exact age are things we unfortunately do not know. As far as the earliest beginnings of Fire Emblem as a series go, we do have some indications that its themes were on Kaga's mind for quite a while. You see, he entered the video game industry in 1986, aged 31, after winning a coding contest from a magazine called Login. Login magazine was published by Enterbrain Incorporated, which is something you can forget for now, but we'll come back later. Anyway, Kaga entered the competition with a small game called Cosmic Fighter. While his exact finishing position is a little unclear, with sources mentioning any place in the top 3, it was Cosmic Fighter that put him on the radar of intelligent systems. At this time, the company had only been around for a few years and was founded mostly as a support studio to help convert Famicom software into NES ROMs, as those weren't the same type of files. However, they had recently begun developing games from scratch as well, such as Soccer for NES, which released a year prior to Kaga's hiring. While not a lot is known about Cosmic Fighter and how it played, Kaga said in an interview it was a role-playing game with hidden romance elements, which sounds awfully similar to a game series he would later end up creating, and in that same interview, he states his greatest hobby ever since he was young was researching military history. Keeping all that in mind, I don't think it can come as a huge surprise that only a few years after his hiring, without working on as much as one other project, Kaga would end up pitching Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. For those of you who don't know, this game is widely considered to be the first successful tactical RPG game ever created, and made the genre something people were actually interested in. Meaning Kaga didn't just create a new series, he essentially created an entire legacy of games, and all that in his first few years of working at Intelligent Systems. While Famicom Wars did already exist at this point in time, another strategy RPG game, Kaga actually didn't work on that game at all. Shadow Dragon was his first ever project, but that didn't stop him from getting quite an important position. He became the lead scenario writer, meaning he is the person that created the long list of tropes that hail from the original game, as well as characters we all know now, like Marth. But because the team working on the game was incredibly small, he pitched in whenever he could. His vision for the first Fire Emblem game was that, unlike other strategy sim games from this era, he wanted to inject elements of a traditional RPG into it, inspired by series like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, where you would end up caring about the characters and become invested in the story. This is also where the idea of permadeath comes from. Kaga also tried to make the game easy to pick up and play, as was and still is Nintendo's main philosophy, another thing in which he broke the trends of the genre at the time. And he wanted players to feel a sense of freedom. Like he put it himself in an interview, in most RPGs, when talking with others, you talk about how far you came in a game. For Fire Emblem, I wanted that question to be, how did you get there? i.e., he wanted everyone to beat chapters in their own way. And all of it paid off, massively. Although it did take a while. Critics originally weren't fond of it, as they found the then unusual combination of RPG and strategy hard to get into, and criticized the game's visuals. But slowly and steadily, the reception started to turn. The original Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light sold very well, especially when you consider it was a brand new series at the time, and as such it didn't take long for a new game to be greenlit, which of course became Fire Emblem Gaiden, released in 1992. All was well and good for a good few years there. Gaiden performed good as well, Mystery of the Emblem fixed some of the problems critics had had with the original game, and Genealogy of the Holy War was a success the likes of which Fire Emblem wouldn't hit again until the series went worldwide. And even then it sometimes struggled to hit it. But it was during the development of Freyja 776 that things turned sour. Despite Intelligent Systems releasing plenty of other games during the late 80s and the 90s, Kaga didn't really work on any of them. Fire Emblem was his baby and his only focus, receiving little more than the occasional special thanks here and there, and helping to design stages for Super Famicom Wars, which was borderline the same thing as working on Fire Emblem anyway. For the first time, it felt like there were some serious problems inside the Intelligent Systems offices. Fire Emblem was supposed to release on the Nintendo 64, but that game ended up cancelled, with Kaga instead preferring to release on the Super Famicom or SNES, despite that console already being outdated at this time, to the point that Freyja is the last Super Famicom game to get a physical release. Not exactly the most sound marketing idea that, and it's hard to say why exactly they went with that decision. But one thing is for certain, by the time Freyja released, Intelligent Systems had bigger problems than that. In early 1990, around 10 months before Freyja would release, Kaga started drafts for a new game, which he dubbed True Emblem. This wasn't meant to be Freyja's follow-up. In April 1999, Kaga left Intelligent Systems for a new, self-founded company he had started while still working for them, called Turnanog. Not exactly ideal, of course, but hey, if the man wants his own venture and a new start, who can blame him? Well, once his old employers found out what exactly Kaga planned to do with Turnanog, they definitely found reason to blame him. As the new president of Turnanog, which also consisted of Mayumi Hirota by the way, the design artist for Freyja, Kaga wanted to release True Emblem on PlayStation. He had even taken design documents he made while at Intelligent Systems along with him, and well, to put it lightly, didn't seem to really care or perhaps know that he couldn't just continue making Fire Emblem on his own. Because that was very much his plan. A new series called Emblem Saga, which was to take place in the same world as his 4 prior Fire Emblem games, and even features several Fire Emblem staples like Manaketes, old characters like Zane, and virtually an identical gameplay formula and themes. And I don't think I have to tell you how Nintendo might have felt about all that coming exclusively to PlayStation. They sued Turnanog and Kaga for copyright infringement, and while they didn't win the case, terms like Manakete and Arcania are things IS owns the copyrights to, so in order to prevent serious problems, those were altered and removed. While his new game would be allowed to follow similar gameplay formulas as Fire Emblem, those aren't copyrighted after all, the game was renamed to Tearing Saga. It was released in May 2001 for the PlayStation and was published by Enterbrain Incorporated, the same company that published the magazine Login that got Kaga his big break all those years prior. True full circle stuff that. But even after the game was released, Nintendo wasn't happy. A second suit followed after release, claiming unfair competition, the argument being that Turnanog and Tearing Saga benefited from using the Fire Emblem name and fame. I mean, it's hard to deny Kaga was doing so. In every single interview, he constantly compared the game to Fire Emblem, ranging from saying that it would continue the Fire Emblem story, to comparing his new main character to Marth, yet also saying he would have multiple characters like in Gaiden, etc. And so, this suit stuck, and was eventually settled out of court, with Everbrain forced to pay Nintendo some hefty fines. That wasn't what Nintendo wanted, mind you, they wanted the game taken off store shelves entirely, but it eventually never came to that. And because controversy still sells, so did Tearing Saga, selling about as much as for example Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light did all those years back, and Binding Blade would the next year. Because yeah, even if Kaga had tried to take Fire Emblem with him in all but name, this series continued at IS without him. Kaga himself also didn't let the lawsuits phase him too much and continued with the Tearing Saga series, releasing a sequel for PlayStation 2 in 2005, which actually deviates quite a lot from both the Fire Emblem series and its direct predecessor, although it is still a tactical RPG of course. Despite us knowing he did work on the game closely, his name is actually not listed in the credits, possibly because the final lawsuits were only resolved very closely before the game's release. And then things got silent. Employees who had previously worked on Turn and Nog started popping up in the credits of other Enterbrain developed games, and in 2012 Kaga wrote on his blog that he was to retire from the industry. But in 2016 he suddenly returned with a self-published new game called the Vestiria Saga, which is available on Steam and once again sees him reunite with Mayumi Hiroda, again artist for Freya 776, all those years back. Vestiria Saga has a bit of a weirdly ordered release schedule, complete with a sequel and several guidance chapters as Kaga calls them, and it's very clear these games are purely the product of Kaga's passion for telling stories and making these games rather than trying to hit the big time. This is further evidenced by the fact Kaga originally struggled to make the product and reached out to his followers in the hope some will be interested in developing Vestiria Saga with him. It speaks volumes to his passion, for sure, but it's also kinda painful to realize that this is where the man that started the Fire Emblem series has ended up. And even though the series has now had several anniversaries under its belt, with another coming up in a few years, Kaga has been mostly scrubbed from Fire Emblem's legacy. He isn't even mentioned in the grand The Making of Fire Emblem book, released during the series' 25th anniversary, despite literally making Fire Emblem, and his name hasn't even had as much as a mention by Intelligent Systems or Nintendo for this entire time. He's not credited in the DS remakes of Shadow Dragon and Mystery of the Emblem, he isn't credited for Shadows of Valentia either, but he did get a mention in the credits of the Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light English version that was temporarily released for Switch. To be fair, removing him from that would have been absolutely bonkers, but this moment was legit the first time Fire Emblem ever acknowledged its creator since the day he left. And that remains insane to think about, especially when you compare it to those other legendary creators I opened the video with. What are your thoughts on Kaga's career? Was Nintendo warranted in going for him as heavily as they did? And did you ever check out the games he released after his departure? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.